Okay, so I hope that you can still hear me. Zoraida, would you read it for us, please?
Yes, of course. Charles de Saint G, mentally impaired. Parisian Society, Spirited Society, 1860. Charles de Saint G was a mentally impaired 13-year-old boy who was still living and whose intellectual faculties were so impaired that he could not even recognize his own parents. He could barely feed himself. He had experienced a complete developmental suspension of his entire organic system. To St. Louis, would you tell us if we could evoke this child's spirit? You can evoke him as if you were evoking the spirit of a deceased person. Your response will seem to imply that we may evoke him at any time. Yes, his soul is held to his body by physical ties, but not by spiritual ones. It can free itself at any time. Evocation of Charles de Saint G. I am a poor spirit held to the earth like a bird tied down by one leg. In your present state as a spirit, are you aware of your complete impairment in this world? Of course, I feel my captivity very well. While your body is sleeping and your spirit is free, do you have thoughts as lucid as if you were in a normal state? While my unfortunate body rests, I am a bit freer to reach out toward the heaven to which I aspire. While in the spirit state, do you experience any sensations of pain as a result of your corporeal state? Yes, since it is a punishment. Can you remember your previous existence? Oh yes, it is the cause of my present exile. What kind of existence was it? That of a young libertine during the reign of Henry III. You said that your present condition is a punishment, so you didn't choose it? No. In your current state of impairment, how can your present life serve for your advancement? It is not null before God, who imposed it on me. Can you see how long your current existence will last? No, but a few more years and I will re-enter my homeland. What did you do as a spirit between your previous existence and your present incarnation? God imprisoned me because I was a thoughtless spirit. In your awakening state, are you aware of what goes on around you despite the imperfection of your organs? I can see and hear, but my body neither understands nor perceives anything. Can we do anything to help you? Nothing. To St. Louis, could the prayers we say for an incarnate spirit have
Thank you, Zoraida.
Okay.
Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay. So before we go into this text that we just read, I'm just going to put the first question there. I want to convey one point that we must pay attention at all times. Let us be very careful with the language and let us not get bogged down on words. Let us get the gist, the whole idea, the concept that is behind this narrative, whether it is the answers of St. Louis or the answers of Charles de Saint-G. Okay? What we see in this very brief passage Zoraida read for us is a huge summary, in a way, of what we have been discussing in Spiritism in other meetings. Not just this particular text, but there's a lot of it there. What we see there first is that the intelligence, the sentience is actually the spirit, the essence that composes the spirit. The intelligence is not in the physical body. The intelligence is in the spirit. And as such, despite the fact that we are looking at the body of a mentally impaired individual, a severely impaired individual, we see that the spirit is very very clear in his answers. So We saw that at the very beginning in the description that this is a child that does not even recognize his own parents. And yet his answers is that of a very mature individual. So we see this difference then. If we were there observing the child and then at the seance looking at the answers of the spirit animating this child, we would see a very big contradiction. But it's not a contradiction when we think about what we study in Spiritism, that the sentience, that the intelligence is in the spirit. And as such, this spirit is capable of showing itself without the impediments, without the difficulties of the physicality of the flesh. And we see that St. Louis very clearly tells us what binds the spirit to the physical body is the physical ties. But when we summon the spirit, it can communicate to us, actually very clearly without the difficulties of the flesh. And then we see that by his own admission, the spirit of Charles de Saint-Gilles used to live at the time of Henry III, who was king of France, Poland, and the Lithuanian Commonwealth. So it was a much larger spread of land. And he was a frivolous man. And he says that this is a punishment for himself, a punishment for the type of life that he had, this libertine life that he had, this like probably licentious life, and that this punishment was not of his own choosing. Before we go all gung-ho on these answers, let me remind everyone of one small little thing. These are not St. Louis's answers. These are Charles de Saint-Gilles' answers. If we look at this spirit, we will see that he has very little moral and intellectual understanding. Therefore, he's going to reveal his situation to us according to what he perceives to be the correct answer. Whether there is malice or not, we cannot tell from this text. Let us just, for sake of argument, assume there is no malice. That's just ignorance. He sees it as a punishment. He tells us that he did not choose it. And yet, before, like I said, we go all haywire about this, let us wait to see the end of this story, because we are going to be very surprised, and we are going to see that there's going to be some incongruence between his answers, or what he believes the answers to be, and the real answers. Okay? So we see a situation where a spirit can communicate freely despite his idiocy, despite his being severely mentally impaired. And we notice that the spirit has some awareness already of what he did before. He tells us that he had a libertine, he was a licentious youth, for instance. He tells about when he behaved as such. So all of this is very important because we see from these answers that we are not dealing with, for lack of a better expression, a mentally impaired spirit. No, the mental impairment is in the physicality. And he tells us, despite his lack of expression of manifestation in the physical realm, that he is aware of his surroundings, that he is aware of everything that is happening around him. Any questions so far?
Yeah, Julio.
Yes,
I'm having a little problem with this answer from St. Louis to the question if you could evoke him at any time, and he answers that his soul is held to his body by physical ties, not by spiritual ones. I had a little problem with that, but also, as much as we have understood in the past, we could, yes, evoke a spirit, incarnate the spirit when the physical body was at rest or sleeping. That so that at any time it baffles me a little bit here.
Okay, Omo, I agree with you. I had problems with it as well, but unfortunately, I could not find an explanation. I did check the original, and the original has exactly what has been given to us in English. To me, it is a little strange. So perhaps there is something that we still don't understand that St. Louis understands in that sense, and something we have to learn. I really could not find something that would explain, first of all, that St. Louis gives the impression, like you said, that in principle we can evoke him anytime. And as we know, if we are evoking the spirit of a reincarnated being, that has to be done when that spirit is at least in a form of trance or at rest, in the sleep state. It's usually done during the sleep state. You're absolutely right. So I really do not have much more to comment on it. I'm at a loss, basically. I don't have something that would be that could address this more properly.
Okay, thanks. And another comment is the evidence that the senses belong to the spirit when the spirit answers that he feels everything that the physical body experiences.
Yes.
I have a question around child form after passing. When it's pretty clear that the child, like a child spirit, could be evoked just like any other deceased person, we see in some depictions, like in Mensageiros, for instance, you see that there is, towards the end of the book, there's a scene that there is a group of children singing, and them saying how great it is that that colony had so many kids. So I wonder, like, this whole notion of being a child spirit, but at the same time, us knowing that age doesn't really matter. Why to preserve the child form? And yeah, what do you
Sorry,
view?
what is your question exactly?
The
I
question is
follow what
about
you're saying.
the child spirit in here we're dealing with a spirit that has passed, that and I'm mentioning an example from Mensageiros in which there were a lot of kids in this hospital, right? There was a lot of great spirits. Like, it was a good spirit colony that it was a station for regeneration.
Mhm.
And many spirits that were there, they had chosen to be kids, and they would be singing. Like, there was a choir, there was a children's choir.
Mhm.
And I wonder, in your readings, what is your view of being a child and still remain that child form as a worker in the spiritual world?
Okay, so there are a few things there we have to separate, especially from, it's a good question still, and it's part of what we're studying, but your example, the one that you're suggesting, does not apply here necessarily, in the sense to apply to Charles Sanji. It's still a question that is valid for us to discuss now. So there is something called the identification of the spirit with a certain stage of evolution. When a child is born and passes away immediately after, that spirit may not have been, may have not identified himself with the child physicality. Okay, so that spirit may return to the spiritual realm and just assume perhaps a form of the mannerisms of a previous life, the one immediately before, or perhaps one that was very marked, but it was very important. Usually it's the one just before. So in that sense, the spirit will return to the spirituality, and after the moment of perturbation on the passage, the spirit will identify itself with a figure, with the physicality it used to have in the two incarnations before, because the last one was too fast. There was no re-identification to a new physical body. When it comes to children, when now we're pushing the death to a little further down, so you can be a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, it will depend. There will be an identification with the body of the child, and then that spirit will continue some form of childhood, adolescence in the spiritual realm. But this is all dependent upon and markedly dependent upon the level of understanding that spirit has. If we're talking about a spirit that is already more evolved morally and intellectually, that spirit may return having died as a child, and after a very brief period, return to the identification with an adult form, what we would call an adult form, take into consideration what we know as physicality. We also may have spirits that will address us, the reincarnated beings, as a child because they were known to us as a child. If I were to appear to my mother, having died at the age of 5 or 10, or my father, I would probably appear as a child. I would appear with my, child behavior because that is what they remember. That's what they can associate to. So it would be much less of a shock if I appeared at that age to them instead of appearing with the mature form or speaking as an adult to them. But in the spiritual realm, apart from the interaction with my mother and father who are still reincarnated, I may show myself, I may identify myself with an adult-like behavior, an adult-like form. The same applies to adolescence and so on. But again, we must remember that it is related to how much the spirit understands and how much morally and intellectually. What we see here, if we go back now to the Charles de Saint-Gilles, he sounds more like an adult type, or at least a young adult, even though he is a child. As we see, he's a 13-year-old boy, right? And this is because there is very little identification with this physicality, since this physicality is almost inert. So he now uses this physicality simply as a sensor. As Elmo just pointed out, he's sensing the physical realm through his physical body, which then relays that information to the spirit. But the spirit does not identify with that's, I'm sorry for the expression, lump of a physical body, because it cannot express itself, manifest itself through it. So that spirit retains most likely the identification of that time when he was a licentious youth.
Thank you.
Good point.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, please.
You told us to wait until the end, but there's so much in this so far. There's a lot. I am going to try to not get bogged down by words, as you mentioned as well. But there's a few things here that it seems very unique, very different. The fact that they're communicating with an incarnate spirit. Very different. And so could it be that in the similar way that this spirit is being invocated and knows why he's in the condition that he is, could it be that if my spirit, if it was my spirit, could it be that I would know why I am where I am in a communication with them through a medium? It's confused. I don't know if I'm explaining what I mean.
So let me see if I understood your question. You're asking that you make a statement saying that the spirit knows his past condition and his present one, and that what you're asking is, would it be possible to evoke a spirit that would not know of his current situation or even his past one?
No, it would be, for example, if my spirit was being evoked, would my spirit know why I am in the condition that I am here. If, for example, I was the one with the disability, because he knows, perhaps because he's a more evolved spirit, I don't know, but would any one of us, if we were to be evoked, would we in the spirit form, in the communication, know more about what we know when we are awake, for example?
Okay, so the question is a good one. I would say this, one problem we have is when we start saying my spirit, my spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's English. There's no way of avoiding it. But here's what I want to convey. I spirit,
Mm-hmm.
because if I know, that's because my spirit knows. So Charles Sanji spirit knows a lot more than Charles Sanji body, physical body,
Mm-hmm.
because that spirit is fully aware. We would be fully aware up, in the sense of as much as we can take at that moment, as
So
much
he
as we
does remember. So he does remember. He just can't convey that he remembers because he's got a disability.
That's right. So the problem is
He
in
does remember.
manifesting, conveying, relaying, expressing, exactly, through the physical body. But he's aware. Is it possible that an individual would go through this and not have a clue at all? Well, I do not have a complete answer, but I would ask another question based on it. Then why would the spirit go through that if he or she would not be able to know and would not be able to understand why and what for? Actually, even more important, what am I going through this for? So I think to get to this level, the level that according to Charles de Saint-G calls an imprisonment, calls a punishment, there would have to be some level of understanding, of awareness, because otherwise there would be no what for. The individual then it would be truly a punishment, because that spirit would not be able to derive any learning from the experience. So for this type of reincarnation process to come to existence, to come to be, the spirit must be at a level that there is an awareness, and that awareness is there at all times. Otherwise, it would be fruitless to go through all of this, because physically he would be pulling sensory information, relaying it to the spirit, but the spirit wouldn't know what to do with that, because the spirit would not have the awareness. So the spirit would not know why all these things were why were they happening, and what they were happening for. So my understanding would be that there has to be some level, a certain level of awareness. Otherwise, there would be no purpose.
Julio, can you hear me?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is we have to understand this is a special case also, right? Because of this, the physical conditions of this spirit incarnated, the spirit is not fully integrated with his physical body in the sense of as we are. So this spirit lives half there, half here, like a child up to 7 years old. And so he's much more able to see it from the spiritual side, his own life, contrary to what Anna said. In our case, if we are invoked, let's say during our sleep, we will be pretty much tied to our physical existence, because we are fully immersed in our physical body in a sense, and this spirit is not. So I think that's kind of answers what Anna was asking about, you know, the difference between him being evoked and us being evoked, in a sense. Okay.
Yep. There's more of an identification. The more we can express ourselves, we spirits, through our physical bodies, the more we identify with it. So we strengthen those ties, as you were saying. Elm, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think most of us, when free from the limitations of the physical body, will have a good remembrance of the immediately past reincarnation and the reasons and the objectives of this incarnation. Most of us, not all of us,
Most of
especially more ignorant and rebellious spirit who did not have any participation in the preparation for the reincarnation, they would not know. But I believe that in our stage of ignorance, most of us would have an understanding, a little remembrance or a good remembrance of our previous reincarnation and the reasons and the objectives of this incarnation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
Júlio,
Yes,
Luisa,
go ahead, Lisa.
what surprises me, and I don't know much about, I haven't read a lot yet about spiritism, but this person, Charles de Saint G, he's alive, and his spirit can be evoked and even know what he was, what he did in a previous life. So I didn't know that a incarnated person could be evoked.
Yes, we can. We can evoke those who are alive here in the in the physical realm with us, or and talk to them. The question is how much they are going to remember from this conversation, which is done at the perispiritual level. And Charles de Saint-G, for instance, will have this very coherent conversation with the members of the seance at the time, but he will not be able to remember, or even if he can remember fragments of it, because of his condition, he will not be able to express anything. But we do have the ability to evoke individuals who are reincarnated at the present time.
As long as they're sleeping.
Yes, as long as there is a trance or a sleep state. Exactly. Very good point. Yeah, don't forget that. We cannot evoke someone when they are in the middle of doing some work, when they are fully aware.
I see. And that would be, necessary use for a certain purpose, right? Not just for out of curiosity, somebody would just go and, I don't know, and invoke that spirit, that person who is still alive. That's my question.
The ability exists. We use it the way we want it, Luisa. So I would not say that it can only be used for good things or constructive things. I would just say the ability is there. We all use it. Actually, it's a way more common than we think it to be, because we have these feelings sometimes. We wake up and we call a friend we haven't spoken to in a long time, and all of a sudden we tell them, oh, I was thinking about you. We were having this conversation. And then sometimes people say, oh yeah, I had some weird feeling also. That is perhaps let's be very careful here, that the two of us met in a dream state the past night or a few nights before, and we just could not relay that information completely to the physical body. So we now have just a feeling or an intuition, whatever word you want to say, an inkling, a gut feeling, whatever it is, that we actually met, that we actually talked. But this happens. In this particular case, Charles de Saint-G is giving a communication that sounds, so he was evoked and everything, but we can meet in the spiritual realm during our sleep state or during a trance state for all kinds of purposes, for constructive as well as for non-constructive principles. You know, like minds think alike. So if I have a very sordid mind, to put mildly, I can actually communicate with other spirits who think exactly like the way I do. And we can actually have a powwow in the spiritual realm while my body is asleep. So the ability has no good or bad connotation. It's the use we make of it that will lead to a constructive or a non-constructive process. But it can happen, yes.
Thank you, Julio. And there is a question for you in the chat.
Okay. Whoops. Let me just. So, but it wouldn't be necessary for both parties to want. Okay. Both parties have to agree. You cannot, evocation does not mean you force upon someone something. This is always very important. It's always a handshake. So it's like a telephone call. If you call me and I decide whether I have caller ID or not, if I decide not to pick up the phone, that's it. I do not pick up the phone. So you have to understand, Charles de Saint-G here agreed to come and talk to the spirit, to the members of the seance. It's always like that. It's always a partnership. There is no way we can force upon it. That will be derogation of our free will. It doesn't matter how poorly evolved we are, morally or intellectually, or even both, we can never, ever force upon anyone a communication.
And we have spirits that come to our mediumistic meetings and refuse to talk.
Exactly.
Right?
Good
They
point.
are brought and they refuse to talk.
Hey, Julia.
Hey, Renato.
I'm not sure if you'll be able to explain any better, but I'm still lost with this case. Because the way I see, because I'm a logical person, so that's why it makes hard for me sometimes to understand. It seems to me that because in the majority of the cases, I understand that João said that this is an exception, but the majority of the cases, when the spirit has this kind of physical problem, and when it goes to the spiritual realm, it keeps the physical issue, whatever it is. And we study, different cases that, in order for a spirit to snap out of it like really quickly, usually is a moral elevated spirit. So this spirit here, besides his physical body, has all this illness, and it seems that he's not that evolved, morally evolved. When he's in the spiritual realm, he's kind of not showing all the illness, everything that he has in the physical body. So it's kind of, for lack of a better word, he's living like two lives. The previous one is a dominant one because that's the one he manifests in the spiritual realm, and the physical one is not even, if you can call it a life. So I'm not sure how, and I understand that you try to explain, but I'm not quite getting it, how a not evolved spirit is able to do all that.
Okay. So, good point. So for everybody, and this is for all studies that we have, not just the Thursdays, not this one, not even Charles de Saint-G, for everything, we must have always in our minds that when we talk about more morally evolved or less morally evolved, there are so many shades of gray, so many gradations, that it's not like 3 points in the continuum, not morally evolved, halfway there, and fully morally evolved, or intellectually evolved. There are so many gradations between the the previous stage, when we were not even called spirits themselves ourselves, to the angelical states, which is the first stage we can begin to have an idea about. There's so many gradations between these two extremes that we always have to read these lessons and not try to be too concerned with the quantitative aspect. So he is an individual who was licentious in his previous life. That means that indicates to us a lack of moral behavior, but a lack compared to what? Well, if you compare to Jesus, for instance, well, that's it. That's our, let's say, absolute, our golden standard, right? But perhaps even less morally evolved than his peers, than the ones around him. So that does not mean necessarily that he's not intellectually evolved. That is another point. And we have to be very careful. Where is the shade of gray he's, that would explain his position? All we can say is that he told us that he's licentious. That means that there was some lack of moral behavior. How much? It's hard to say. So just because he has less, we don't know how much this less really applies to, it doesn't mean that he will not be able to have an intellectual side. And it does not mean he does not have any moral behavior at all. It just means that he has less, and that he's already aware that he has less than what he could have. In other words, he's already aware that he misbehaved. So he already has some better standard of morality, and he already knows that he did not apply it. He acknowledges it to us. Where the standard is in the whole gradation curve, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the spirit realizes that he did not do all that he could do in the past life. And because of that, he senses this reincarnation as a punishment. Okay? So we have to be careful with this gradation process. And awareness does not mean necessarily that he understands everything in great detail also. So the spirit, whether it's Charles de Saint-G or any spirit that communicates to us, they may say to us, oh, yes, I did this, that, and the other in a past life. They are aware of their misbehavior, but they may not exactly understand why that was a misbehavior or even how to correct for it. But the awareness is the first stage, is the first step. And this is very important.
So
I don't know if I cover everything.
Yes.
Not.
Yes. So all the, because we study also the sometimes what manifests on the physical is what it is already in our perispirit. So in order to have all the impairment on the physical, so and the spirit also, the way it shows you present here, the spirit is fine. So all the impairment that is showing us on the physical, can we assume that's more of a moral thing that manifests that, not necessarily a physical thing? That's why he's able to, at spiritual level, be not present whatever is in the physical, because what shows was moral. Is that what we're studying here?
Okay, this is fantastic. The representation of the spirit, which then relates to the perispirit, or the essence, which then relates to the perispirit, and the perispirit to the physical body, is not necessarily a one-to-one correspondence. Let me explain what I mean by that. The physical body is physical, therefore material. The perispirit is not physical, but it's material. The perispirit has a correspondence to the physical body. There you have a correspondence. But the spirit, or the essence, to be more precise, cannot be mentally impaired. Because number one, it's neither physical nor material. And the essence only has an ability developed or a lack of that development, but not a disease, because there's nothing that can deteriorate in the essence.
Say that
The
again.
essence cannot forget.
Say that one more time, please.
The essence, not being physical, not being material, cannot deteriorate. So the essence does not have a disease. The essence does not have medical conditions. What the essence has is an ability that has developed based on the exercise of the intelligence principle, or an ability that is not there yet. It's the lack of it, because the essence has not applied itself, has not applied its intelligence principle to develop it. These lacks of abilities, or these lacks of conditions, or formation of the self, will then manifest in the perispirit. There you're going to have the conditions or the diseases, and that will be then passed on to the physical body when there is a reincarnation process. The physical body can be an idiot. The physical body can be mentally retarded. But as you move closer and closer to the essence, what you see is a translation of what we see in the physical realm as mental impairment. You translate that to the spirit, or the essence, as a lack of certain principles, certain abilities. This is why I said necessarily there is no one-to-one correspondence, in the sense that if I break a leg in the physical realm, it doesn't mean that my perispirit has a leg broken. And it definitely does not mean that my essence, my spirit, has a broken leg. Remember the famous phrase from Francisco Xavier, my body is sick, but my perispirit, my spirit is not. So the correspondence is a one-to-one, in the sense that whatever the spirit or essence lacks becomes manifested in the physical realm, in the physicality, as a disease or as a medical condition. But it's not that what we see in the physical realm is what we would see in the spiritual realm, and definitely not at the essence or the spiritual level, because the essence is no material. It doesn't have a body to break a leg, to sneeze, to cough. So this is why we have to understand that what this physical body is now representing to him is what we would call a claustrum, a solitary imprisonment, to give him the time for him to evaluate a life that is devoid of manifestation, of expressions, so he can, in the silence of his mind, at the spirit, at the essence level, gather all the physical sensory input of his surroundings. As he said very well, I can sense, I can feel everything from my body, but I cannot do anything with what I have. I cannot do anything through my physical body. Charles de Saint-Just cannot do anything through his physical body, but his spirit, his essence is learning. And this ties up with the previous question. This is why there has to be some awareness of that spirit, of this condition, because otherwise all this sensory input would be in vain. So be careful with the correlation that we make. His spirit has never been mentally impaired, not even his spirit. But because of actions, the perispirit is so perturbed, that when that perispirit decides to put together a physical body, it puts it together and malforms it, misshapes it. And then we see in the physicality as a mentally impaired physical body. Think of it this way: when you have to do something at work, let's say, and you're bothered with someone who's sick, or you're bothered with, let's say, an altercation you had with another co-worker, or with a subordinate, or even with your boss, an altercation, let's put it this way. It disturbs you while you're doing that job, and you might not, and most of the time we do not do as good a job as we would do if we were not bothered by that previous altercation. Imagine that the perispirit is in that situation. It is so perturbed with everything that he lived in the past life, that when he created the physical body, he created the physical body with little care, let's put it this way, and created it with a mental impairment. The perispirit itself is not mentally impaired, it's perturbed. And the spirit is neither perturbed nor mentally impaired. The spirit lacks a certain moral development. That lack of certain moral development made the perispirit perturbed, which then made the physical body mentally impaired. In that sense, there is a correlation that goes from one end to the other beautifully. But you notice that we cannot say it's a one-to-one in exact terms, because we cannot say that the other two, spirit and perispirit, are mentally impaired. Hope I was clear.
Thanks, Júlio. I hope you record this, João.
Recorded and on YouTube, so you can watch later.
I'm gonna need it. You just blew my mind away. Oh my God.
Can I give an example? Maybe you help?
Oh yes, go ahead.
So assume that I have a problem with discipline and anger. And because of my indiscipline and my anger, I keep throwing things around or keep kicking on things. And I throw away my cell phone and I kick it and I damage my instrument of work and of communication. So when you see me and you talk to me, you don't see a problem. But if you try to communicate with me with my cell phone, you'll see a lot of problems. I don't understand what Elmer is saying. His text is all jumbled up. He's not doing his work properly because I use my cell phone to work and I'm not sending the proper pictures and not sending the proper images because my instrument is defected as a consequence of my moral, intellectual ignorance, let's put it this way. So I, the spirit, I'm okay, I don't have a problem, but my instrument of work is defected as a consequence of my ignorance. Does it help?
Yeah, thanks, Elmo. Yeah, another piece of the puzzle. Thanks.
Anyone else? Nope. Then we can read, I think it's St. Louis's remarks,
Yes,
I believe.
yes.
Go back
Okay.
there. So
Okay,
to St. Louis.
Could the prayers we say for an incarnate spirit have the same effectiveness as for an errant spirit? Prayers are always good and are agreeable to God. In this poor spirit's case, they do not do him any good at present, but they will serve him later. God will take them into account. This evocation confirms what has always been said about the mentally impaired. Their mental impairment does not correspond to their spirit's impairment. Regardless of the physical organs, the spirit enjoys all of its faculties. The imperfection of the organs is only an obstacle to the free manifestation of thought. Thus, it is like a hare and a hardy man whose limbs have been tied.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
What we are going to see here, we have to be careful with the answer. There's quite a lot that we have to understand here. Prayers are always good, period. Right? Now we have to understand what the good means or where it is applied. This is where St. Louis has a brilliant answer for us. So let us look first on the general statement. Then we'll move towards Charles de St. Jesus' example. Prayers are always good because the one who says it evokes something. We are going to be talking about prayer in the constructive sense, okay? We're not going to be talking, we are meaning prayers here in the most constructive way possible. We're not talking about prayers to win the lottery or prayers. These are prayers, but whether they are going to happen or whether they are useful is a different story. We're talking prayers here with the sense of constructive behavior. When we say a prayer, the one praying is actually placing himself or herself in a state of meditation. Even if it's for a second, it doesn't matter. There is a state of meditation, a state when the prayer is sincere, of course, when the individual pulls what is the most precious, the most constructive that exists in himself or herself and externalizes that towards the heavens. Whether the prayer is directly to God, whether the prayer is to Jesus Christ, whether the prayer is to anyone, it doesn't matter. In that sentiment, out comes what is the most sacred, what is the most beautiful, what's the most constructive in the individual uttering the prayer. This is what is important. So just from the point of view of the one saying it, it's always constructive. Now let's say the recipient. So this is the transmitter, okay? The one transmitting, one saying the prayer. Let's look at the receiver side. The receiver side is a little bit of a different story. It is always positive, yes. However, the receiving side may not be open to that prayer. It is the equivalent of your having your cell phone in off mode. I can call and I can call and I can call and I can dial as to my heart's content. It will not ring. You won't even know someone is attempting to reach you because your phone is off. So in this case, we're talking about a person and a piece of technology. In the sense of the spirit, it will be the spirit raising barriers for the communication. I go back to the spiritual realm, for instance, and I am so enraged of something that happened to me, not necessarily to someone. I'm just enraged with my past life. I don't accept it. I do not accept being poor. I do not accept not being rich, or I do not accept not being the cleverest man around, or the most beautiful, whatever it is. All our personality mistrates or distortions, whatever it is, I go back there and I have this grudge. If now someone is uttering a prayer to me, for me and to me, all right, whether that individual is a reincarnated being or not, it may be another errant spirit, another spirit that is now in the spiritual realm, okay? may be saying a prayer to me and for me, and I will not be able to pick it up because I am so internally perturbed with this grudge that it's as if my receivers are all in the off mode. But the prayer stays there. The prayer gathers the spirit who really love me, who are close to me or the closest to me, and mobilize them. The prayer mobilizes them, to assist me. The moment that I lower my barriers, that I lower that negative guard against help, they will be able to have access to me and bring me the prayers, the sentiments, the constructive feelings, and so on and so forth. So we have to understand this difference here. The one transmitting it, saying the prayer, and the ones receiving it, acknowledging the prayer. Now that we have seen it in the general sense, let us apply it to Charles de Saint-G, because then we will be able to understand St. Louis's message, answer, a little better, because it may look a little incongruous at first when he says that the prayer, he says here, the prayers will do him, Charles de Saint-G, no good at present. He means by that this is a spirit still with a grudge, a spirit who still has the barriers up, a spirit who is on guard against any form of help. So the prayers will go to him, but will bounce off from this wall of negativity, this wall of grudge, of anger, of irritability that the spirit is still displaying. But look what he says right away so that we don't get the message from the wrong point of the stick. God will take them into account. It's like what we say usually in the Spiritual Center. It will put in a safe and it will be kept for that spirit. When that spirit is ready to receive them, they will be available to it. It's in the sense that this spirit is still very enraged with his own condition, as Charles de Saint-G. There is also one other thing that we need to understand. We may be praying for this spirit to have, let's say, some form of soothing scenario, some form of relaxation on his difficulties. That cannot be applied because that would derogate from the natural laws, because it would involve changing the physical body that he has. So he has to undergo now what he set to motion, the consequences of his actions. But that prayer, even if we, let's say, mispray, we pray the wrong way, that we are asking, oh, maybe you shouldn't suffer this much. What this is translated to is a sentiment of love, of empathy. So what the spirit will receive is the empathy, not our desire that the spirit has the body changed or the mind changed, the physical mind here, if we can say that. This is very important for us to understand. What arrives at the receiving end is the empathy, not pity, empathy. What arrives at the end is love. Because we also, not being perfect beings ourselves, we may, when we pray, we may say things that are not exactly correct. We may wish according to what we understand of reality. So we may wish more than it's possible, but what arrives at the receiving end, filtered, is the love, the empathy, the charity, the sincerity of our wishes. Okay, I think I'll stop here. I talked too much. We probably have time for one quick question. No? Okay. So, Carol, would you do the honors and say the closing prayer for us? Or if somebody else wants to do it?
Sure.
Thank you.
Infinite Creator, good spirits, our spiritual benefactors, the mentors, those who are guiding us tonight during this session, we are truly grateful. We receive the beautiful love, light, and healing as we are reminded that we are also cultivating this within so we may share it with others. May we be respectful of others, and may we understand that through respect, we are also creating a greater awareness toward loving another. May we be kind to one another, and may we cultivate a certain grace within to assist each other to move on the path towards spiritual perfection. We know that there are many challenges. We know that there are peaks and valleys in life, but we also know that we are surrounded with hope, with grace, with charity from our spiritual benefactors and through the Christ light within. May we hold these truths within, share them with others as we are able to do so through discernment. We are grateful for the opportunity to be together this evening through unity and through sisterhood and brotherhood, a family of a spiritualist group. We are grateful for all we have received, and may we continue throughout the week with our prayers, with our studies, with our mindfulness and contemplations, so that we may return again next week. We are grateful now, and as we close this meeting tonight, may we humbly ask for safety, protection, health, and well-being for those in our families, our friends, our loved ones, and co-workers as well. We close now and remind ourselves to be beacons of light. Go forth now in peace, so be it.
Thanks. Remember our lectures on the weekend, Sarah.